For my 2D animated text, I only had one major problem. As I had the letters appear simultaneously, with the entire letter being drawn by one continuous line, when I went to add lens flares to the end of the lines, they were out of sync. As I wanted the letters to start and finish more smoothly, I added an ease in and ease out keyframe to the letters' pathways, but forgot to add it to the lens flares, resulting in a strange looking product. The solution was to simply add an ease in and ease out keyframe to the flare's position, but it took me quite a while to find it. There were a few problems when prototyping my 3D animated text. The first one being the text wouldn't track well in the scene with too much movement, so to solve this I ensured when filming my background footage for the text, it was quite simple movements so the text looked like it fit within the scene. Similarly, another issue is when the text was too large in the scene, it could result in the edges of the letters looking very blurry. To combat this issue, I added FXAA anti-aliasing to smooth out any of the jagged edges, which resulted in a far better looking product. Finally, the text didn't implement very well into the scene by default. So to solve this, I added reflection to the text based on the scene around the letters, as well as adding a slight drop shadow where I thought was necessary. While doing my 3D modeling and animation, I had a couple of problems that I needed to fix. Firstly, when I implemented my car models from Blender into Unity, they brought across a strange cylinder asset. I originally believed this was because Unity didn't recognize the differencing function in Blender, but later realized it was just some bug that could be solved by leaving the assets off the wheels. Secondly, while my 3D animated street scene had a lot of colors, I felt it was lacking quite a lot in vibrance. So to fix this, I used Unity's inbuilt post VFX options to add some vibrance, brighter colors, and some fog to the scene. When I created my texting effect, I only had a couple of errors I needed to fix. Firstly, the motion tracking of the text to the phone was quite a bit off as a character walks in front of the person texting. To solve this, I manually tracked the keyframes to the hand of the character texting so it looked fluid throughout its entirety. Secondly, when the character walks in front of the character texting, I needed the text to disappear behind him. So to fix this, I used After Effects masking tool to draw frame by frame around the texts and applying animation to disappear and reappear as I saw fit. While creating my keys transition, the only problem I had was implementing the keys into the virtual desert-like scene. To make the keys look like it fit more within the scene, I added some color correction to the keys to make them appear a bit more yellow, as well as adding a drop shadow at the right strength, distance and opacity to look like the keys were on the ground in the sun instead of floating above the ground. When creating and editing aspects of my website, I only had one problem that I needed to solve. When implementing my Majorwork video onto the website, I put it in the header section on a background image. This was a problem, as if the user tried to zoom in or out on the web page, the video would scale very strangely, distorting elements of the page. To fix this, I moved the entire video division down into the content section of the HTML document to fix any scaling issues. While scripting the movement of assets in my scene in Unity, I used the language C#. To create any changes in position of the assets, I used the following line of code. The code would use transform.position for any movement of the asset in the scene, vector3.forward for the direction of the movement, and time.delta-time, which means regardless of frames per second, the asset would move at the same speed. By creating a public float variable called speed, I could alter the speed at which the assets would move in Unity depending on the number I used. I used a similar script for the rotation of the car wheels, which would allow me to choose the axis of rotation as well as how fast I wanted the wheels to rotate. My only problem when utilizing the scripts I created was getting my axes right for the objects in the scene. This led to some interesting results, but after some quick tweaks, I got everything looking how I wanted. Ultimately, my scripts were efficient, did the job I needed, and worked well for my 3D animation. They were simple lines of code that allowed me to make the quick changes I needed to when filming. To create my car radio effect, I heavily utilized masking and After Effects 3D camera tracker to get the look I wanted. I found a very similar font to the one the car radio uses, and motion tracked it to the scene so it appeared on top of the original text. This allowed me to get the text to look far more digital and vibrant within the scene. However, with this added text layer came the problem of the text appearing above the hand instead of below it. To solve this problem, I manually masked around the edge of the hand for each frame it was above the text. This took quite some time, but the final result was definitely worth it. Overall, the car radio effect was definitely one of my better effects. The text looks realistically implemented within the scene, and the masking around the hand is practically unnoticeable. I was very happy with how this effect looked in the final product. To create my spinning disc transition for the song changes in my production, I used Adobe Illustrator and a reference image. I traced around the edges of the reference image to get the dimensions and scales of the elements correct, as well as making a few small adjustments. When implementing this into Premiere Pro, I hadn't utilized the layers in Adobe Illustrator, resulting in the entire image spinning instead of just the disc. To solve this, I exported each separate layer of the image as different image files so I could edit them individually. I added a quick rotation to the disc and a rapid up and down motion to the arm hovering above it. To create the ball rolling animation, I created some simple assets in Illustrator and used keyframes in After Effects to alter the movement of the lines, ramp and ball going down the slope. My only problem with this section of the animation occurred when exporting some prototypes. I initially used optical flow to give the animation a smooth movement, but resulted in some tearing in the assets. To solve this problem, I simply used frame sampling to export this section of my production. Ultimately, I was decently satisfied with how the 2D animation in my production came out. I feel as though the ball rolling animation could have been slightly improved in certain aspects, but the spinning disc animation actually looked pretty good and worked well with my audio choices. For frame rates, I prototyped exporting at these rates. For real life aspects of my film, I liked 29.97, but I also needed to prototype this for any animation within my project. I saw how jagged the animation looked at 29.97, so to fix this I went with 60 FPS instead for any animation in my project. Overall, I was happy with this frame rate as I believe it resulted in my film having a fluid look throughout its entirety. I also had to prototype resolutions to test what definition I wanted the film to be in. I tried out 720p but found it to be too blurry, 1080p which seemed like a good definition, and 4K which was overkill. I went with 1080p due to the high definition look as 4K was too high in file size. Overall, I believe 1080p was the correct choice for my project as it's a high detailed resolution.